If where dopamine is made in their brain comes from only food, if their pleasure is only from food, they spend a lifetime chasing, how do I feel pleasure from that food again? Our brain is not designed to get dopamine from one source. The addictive component to having processed foods in our life, especially those high in carbohydrates, is truth.
Dr. Boz, obesity expert and author.
Brazilian woman with this really thick accent, and she's talking super fast and super loud, saying, I just got out of hospital. And she's shaking the book at me. Do you know what they fed me? I had colon cancer. They removed it. They fed me. Pudding. There are things that happen in your life that will wire who you become. If during that season of brain growth, you have a trauma or you have something very sensational happen, it's wired into who you are. That's super important for brain health. Forgive yourself for screwing it up and get back on the wagon, because it is area under the curve where you have ketogenic circulation. If you want that inflammation to go away, if I wanted my mom's cancer to really stay suppressed, gone, the word cure makes everybody nervous, but for all practical purposes, it was an autoimmune process that was causing it. And as long as her inflammation stayed low, she was golden. She looked great.
Hey there, welcome to the Happy Habit Podcast. I'm Matthew. You'll find me here Mondays and Thursdays talking to experts, really interesting people on the subjects of health, well-being and self-improvement. If that is your thing, if you're into those subjects, well then please show your support, like, subscribe, share with others who you think might enjoy these subjects too. Show your support on iTunes and Spotify. Leave us a positive rating there. And if you're on YouTube, like many, become a subscriber there. Leave a comment under any of the videos and join the conversation, and click that bell notification for any future videos, which, as I said, come every Monday and Thursday. Well, today I'm delighted to be speaking with the famous Dr. Boz. If you have any interest at all in metabolic health, in weight loss, in chronic illness, inflammation, this is the conversation for you. Dr. Boz knows more than most about the importance of the foods we consume. She even treated her own mother after she had been diagnosed with cancer by altering her diet in such a way that her mother's quality of life and her lifespan were improved, to the astonishment of everyone. In this episode, we hear about how glucose and fat are used as a fuel source in the body, and by switching from glucose to fat, we can see dramatic changes in our metabolism. We ask what foods we should be eating and what foods we should definitely be avoiding if we want to achieve a state of ketosis, which comes from a low-carb, high-fat diet. We discover that this approach is a long-term approach and is best served if you have support and an accountability partner. Knowing that Dr. Boz eats a ketogenic diet herself, I ask her whether she enjoys eating food, given so many foods aren't allowed, to which she gives a really very interesting answer. I very much enjoyed this chat. Not only is Dr. Boz a medical professional with a legion of over 600,000 followers online, but she has worked on the front lines treating patients with weight and metabolic issues for many years. Indeed, chief amongst her patients have been her mother. So when Dr. Boz speaks about diet and nutrition, she has personal and professional experience of what she is trying to teach to others. This is a great conversation, so informative, and I hope you enjoy. Beyond your basic training in medical school and over and above your role as a doctor day to day, up until your mother was diagnosed with cancer, did you have any particular interest in diet?
Nope. So it's not fair. I grew up in I'm from a dynasty of hog farmers. So I grew up knowing that this is where food comes from. This is what a tractor looks like. This is what you feed your cattle when you're finishing them. This is what you feed hogs. This is how you butcher hogs. I went to a keto conference where they were talking about how carnivore are you? And one of the bragging points I was able to say is, I've castrated more hogs than you've eaten.
Oh, God. There's a line.
So when it comes to really being connected to food, my source of food origin is really homegrown prairie cooking. Sure, we had lots of processed food. We had lots of bad habits. Don't get me wrong. But I do think I had a little bit of an advantage that I didn't have to relearn what normal really was in the world of how do you reset somebody's nutrition and how close should you get back to what grandma had done. And so I think that's about the learning I had was probably DNA woven from the crib. And then it all went away when I went to medical school. They taught me everything wrong.
Well, you mentioned grandma there. I want to come back to that a second. I talk to many specialists about diet on this podcast, but your journey and your personal story really, really spoke to me. It really resonated with me because your mother had been given this leukemia diagnosis and you were at a crossroads, both of you. You could take the conventional route of treatment, including radiotherapy, chemotherapy and drugs, or you could take the path less travelled, that of the ketogenic diet, which I believe was a seed planted by Tim Ferriss of all people. Can you tell me about this?
Right. So my clinic had been in practice for probably 15 years at that point, and it was about peak brain performance. Patients would come to me as an internal medicine doctor for many problems, but what kind of put them all on the quilt of patients that were at my clinic is they were looking for peak brain performance. And even if they weren't looking for it, we tried to say, you're going to need this if you want to get away from us, get healthy enough to get away from us. And there was an interview. So I have my own selection of podcasts that I would listen to about what's the industry doing for peak brain performance, and leave it to Tim Ferriss to, biohack his way around getting his brain to do what, it was failing him for some reason or another. And he was talking with one of the experts in metabolic health, which was Dom D'Agostino. His focus was on mitochondrial health in athletes, but specifically that cellular health for he had been contracted with the Navy SEALs there in Florida, had done some underground or underwater diving, trying to help with their tendency towards seizures. So it was very in the realm of how are these brains not working and how can we get them working? And in many respects, the first part of that podcast was very reassuring to me. I'm a firstborn female into a farming family, and I really like that leadership role of telling people what to do. Maybe is a little too often, but also being good at what I was doing. And I think in the space of medicine, it's very easy to say this is what the standard of medicine is doing, and say I'm good enough. And I liked to live on the edge of that, especially in the space of my career. The advancements in what you can do in brain health has been a gift to me. So they were talking about all of the ways that these Navy SEALs and these underground or underwater the seizures that were happening underwater were being addressed. And Tim Ferriss and Dom D'Agostino were going through several things. And I'm like, yep, we do that in my clinic. Yep, we do that in my clinic. Yep, we do that in my clinic. And then they said, well, everything they were doing, I was doing, except a ketogenic diet. And it was such a bizarre word to me at the time. Like, wait a minute, isn't that what happens in the ICU when the type 1 diabetic suddenly thinks they don't need insulin anymore? I couldn't even, I'm really good at what I do. Why don't I know about this? And maybe that's a little arrogant, but I couldn't believe I didn't know what they were talking about. So I even listened a couple of times and said, all right, let me see if I can figure this out. And so I actually had to go over to the medical school library. This is 2015, because there wasn't a whole bunch of internet people talking about it. You look like a crazy person if you were talking about no carbohydrates and the almost all fat diet. And, I'm 15 years into medicine then. If you want to hear some of the crazy ideas people have about how a diet can change things, I have hundreds of stories of people saying, my neighbor said that if I douche with acai berry concentrate that it will reverse my cervical cancer. And I went to her funeral, and her kids stood there with her husband. And the woman who sold her that line of bull didn't attend the funeral. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. I mean, it gets me angry. Like, okay, if you're going to advise people on life-changing events, you better know your stuff. Don't sell them a bill of goods because they trust you more than me. And unfortunately, in the industry of medicine over the last 30 years, we've done a lot of betrayals to the patient that we don't have. We should better say we don't have the answer than to try and say, do it this way. We think it's the best we've got. And although I think there are people in the industry backing away from the edge, trying to not be so bold in understanding nutrition, that wasn't the case in 2015. You found multi-level marketing companies doing a better job of convincing patients of the right thing to do than the internist could do. You know, that disappointment led to me three or 4 days. Yeah, it was 3 days in my local medical school library saying, and I wouldn't tell anybody what I was doing. If you want to keep a clinic going, do not cancel patients and go study at the library. There's just no time for that. So it was a very bizarre moment where my team is like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't want to tell you. I don't want to tell you what I'm doing. So I started to try and weave, how could I better understand a ketogenic diet? It's 6 months later when I've got a pretty good understanding. I have a few patients where I've whispered this word, and then I get, like, I just don't have the confidence to really lead them through a treatment plan. And I am trying to reach out to a few people and they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what are you talking about? You know, that's not going to help this patient's brain. And so, you know, I don't know. I'm a woman of faith. I think God knew I was going to need a really big calling in order to confidently follow what I was reading about in these really old journals of, you know, a ketogenic diet helping with seizures. And, you know, my mom had this cancer of her white blood cells for 10 years. It wasn't this, new problem. It was a problem that we knew when she would get to a cancer replication rate that it was doubling every 6 weeks, we had to intervene. And the first time we did that, she ends up in a hospital with West Nile virus, couldn't hardly live through that. The second time around, the chemotherapy destroyed her brain so much that she made every piece of clothing until I was in the 6th grade. She didn't know what a sewing machine was after the second round of chemotherapy, second time. So by the third time, you know, I've tried to get into ketosis. I've tried to do this myself. I'm not telling anybody what I'm doing. I make every mistake possible. And then I go on a ruck hike for Memorial Day, this last weekend, yesterday in America. I go with my kids. It's a 26-mile hike. And I think, if I am not peeing a ketone by the time this hike is over, this is a scam. I couldn't pee a ketone. And I was probably 30 pounds overweight, you know, a typical physician, work hard, you know, plenty of stress, not really, you know, following anything about, you know, lowering carbohydrates. You know, it's well-balanced meals is what we're supposed to tell people, high fiber. And so I did this ruck pack, and I was so excited that I was peeing ketone at the end of that ruck. I didn't want to eat a thing. I was like, I don't know how to stay here, but this is great. And it was about a week later that my mom had this moment where she walked through the door. She lives 100 miles away from me. She walks through the door into the hospital where we go together to see her oncologist, who's my friend. And as she walks through the door, there's a thing in medicine where you begin to see patterns in patients, patterns in people. And there's a look of grayness, a look of dingy. And it's not anywhere in the diagnostic place, but it's a sense, and I can feel it when you see it, like, uh-oh. And my mom had that look. And her lymph nodes in her neck were, you know, big. I didn't need the blood test to say she's got a terrible mess going on. We're now like 1 in 500 white blood cells are working. And at this point, 50 out of the last 52 weeks, she needed an antibiotic to just keep the infections away because her white blood cells were so crippled. So we go through the motions, and the doctor's doing what he does, and he hands her the pink slip to go get the chemotherapy. And she says, I'm not doing it. And he goes, he asks her, are you serious? And then she gets nervous and she says, let me just talk to my daughter about it. And so we leave. He goes, well, here's the pink slip. This is where you'll go. And we live in this very rural state. So the assignment for to set up the stuff is down one hallway. And we're standing at the front door of the hospital. And she says something to me that, well, lots of patients have asked me this, but sometimes I just don't have the energy to tell them the truth. My mother said, if it was you, what would you do? And I'm not being glib by saying I don't tell patients the truth. I tell them what you're supposed to tell them, what the guidelines say, and sometimes I tell them the truth, but it's a lot of energy to tell them the truth, a lot of vulnerability. And when you see 35 patients today, sometimes you just don't have the energy. But that's not an excuse when it's your mom. I said, Mom, do you trust me? And I get emotional thinking about this moment. She's like, oh, you're the only one I trust. And I said, I would walk out that front door and let me drive you to the farm. And we're going to do something called a ketogenic diet for 6 weeks. And my mom is not a biochemist. She's a hog farmer's wife. She didn't know what any of those words meant. But we left my car in the parking lot of that hospital. We drove 100 miles. Well, I start to explain things like, there's these little things called mitochondria, and they burn energy. And yours only burns glucose. And we're feeding your cancer because it is every cell in your body is so soaked with a high insulin state that it's turned into a growth factor. It's making the cancer grow, specifically the one of your white blood cell. And we get to the farm, and she's a prairie woman. She's got preserves of every kind of fruit and jam and, flour and processed. And I mean, the size of the garbage bags that we had to take out of the house. Thank God we had some pork in the freezer. And it really did throw down the gauntlet of the messiest version of a ketogenic diet I've probably ever done. But I said, I'll do it with you, Mom. We'll do this together. And that was the first patient that I put on it. It was our hope that, her cancer, she has got 6 months to live if we don't do anything. So at 6 weeks where we're secretly not doing the chemotherapy, we're doing this thing that I can't really tell anybody about because I just don't have the confidence to do that at that point. But I'm reading everything I can get my hands on. I had printed out this really big stack of literature when I did those 3 days of hiatus. And now I've read them all. And now I'm trying to find any way to make sure I know where will I screw her up. And I knew something was up by about the 3rd week where she hadn't asked for any antibiotics. Like nothing had, we don't have screen sharing at that point, but I can hear in her voice that she's alive. She's got this energy that, a child can hear it in their mother. And it gives me goosebumps to remember that, like, oh, there's Mary Poppins. A town of 800 people, my nickname for her was Mary Poppins. Whenever something magically needed to be done in our town, she didn't have to be elected mayor to get it done. She didn't need to say, oh, the kids at the Sunday school need somebody to lead the music. She would just do it. And no training, no background, just show up and do it. And I really think that has a premise for why I've stood in this space and not run away, that nobody around me was doing the ketogenic diet. I was already excommunicated from much of medicine because I lived on the edge of, yep, this is what the guidelines say, but that's only 80% of our thinking, folks. The other 20% is what we are tasked as physicians to do. And when you leave that, you stay in the cheap seats and you don't take the risk of what you think the right thing to do is, but you don't have the perfect double-blinded placebo-controlled trial, but you have patients getting better. Well, use your stewardship of being a clinician and a scientist, and then use your courage and faith to say, all right, I think this is the right thing to do. And with your own mother, it was definitely the scariest journey for me. So she shows up. I don't see her for the 6 weeks. Again, I have 3 kids and I've practiced and life is busy, but I talk with her. And so we show up at this doctor's appointment again 6 weeks later. And when she walks in the door, it was a moment where she's backlit by the sun ray. I mean, the image is so imprinted in my mind. And the gray look that had been there, well, it was not there. And I didn't need a blood test to say something's better. I just knew that I was about to explain to one of my favorite people in the whole world, one of the top people in the medical school, teachers, a colleague, oncologist leading our city for several things, that he was the pillar in medicine. And I'm about to take him, my mother, for something that I've been experimenting with her life on. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how it's doing. And he doesn't know that she hasn't done chemo yet. So we get to the exam room, they've drawn her blood, we're waiting for the results. And it's taking a particularly long time. And I can hear his voice outside the room saying, "Where are the reports?" And I know what he's looking for. He's looking for the evidence that she'd done chemotherapy. And so I'm like, the last minute I said, "Mom, if he asks you any questions, just shut up. I don't know what to tell him." So I was nervous. And he walks in and they had to draw the blood again. So they come in, they draw the blood again because he's like, it must be a mistake. And here it was. We were hoping that her blood had not doubled in 6 weeks because that's how you measure this cancer. And I thought, well, maybe if it's only increased by 50%, that'll be a really good measurement. But I had no space in my mind that you were going to lower her blood count by 70%. The chemotherapy wasn't even supposed to do that. And he looks at her and says, "What are you doing?" And of course, she looks at me and I'm like, "Nothing." And I did write about him in the book. I don't know if he ever read the book, but it was one of those moments where I'm like, "Oh, don't out me. I know something good is happening here. And if you shame me into compliance, you have the power to. You're one of my favorite mentors, right? And you're taking care of my beloved mother." And he knew better. He had this wonderful balance in his career too, where I don't know why it's working. I've seen miracles. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Let me check you again in 6 weeks. And, that's the first 5 chapters of the book. And I've been happily married for many years. But if you've been married and your spouse tells you to do something, at least in my marriage, it's the last thing I want to do. And as I've got this list of understanding why is this doing this, because I have to settle that in my mind in order to keep helping her. And so on our bathroom mirror, I would put these yellow sticky notes of, here's the lessons that I need to teach my mom. But she has a brain injury, essentially. She's had 2 major rounds of chemotherapy. She's 71. She used to be an avid reader, hadn't read in years. And I knew that I could just dose her the information as we went along. And so after I'd taught her the lesson and I thought she understood it, I would move it to the other side of the mirror. And for these, several weeks, my husband keeps saying, "You should write a book. You should write a book." And I'm like, "Shut up. I don't have time to write a book." And, he made me a bet. And the bet was, I was so sure I was going to win the bet. I was willing to bet this, that if he won the bet, I was going to take the next 4 months, shut down my schedule and write this book. If I won the bet, then I don't even remember when I got it. Obviously I lost the bet. And so I took 4 months to write this book of the story and then the lessons I was teaching her, and really kind of using her journey as something that parallels so many people. And, the book should be a love story between a mom and a daughter. It really is me saying, "Mom, I have the privilege of being a physician because of what you gave me, a stable, supportive childhood and the smell of hog chores to keep me studying when everybody else partied. What a gift." And this moment of failure would be that I have nothing to offer you but chemotherapy. And that wasn't true. It was that that's what everybody else was offering. And as you understand how a ketone works, I mean, you look at the headlines and you're like, oh, great, you lose weight. Yeah. Your fat cells are opening. You have fat flowing through your body at a much higher rate when you're in a ketogenic state. But there is a remarkable reversal of the inflammatory problems that caused things like the kind of cancer she had, like autoimmune disorders, like the brain injury that Dom D'Agostino was trying to prevent, and also to heighten that brain performance while underwater, with machine guns and, sniping people. Really looking at that peak performance of brain function, not just in your Navy SEAL, but in my mother. And I self-published the book. I thought 12 people would read it. And it's sold over 1 million copies by now. So it's just a gift from God.
That's amazing. It really is. And you can certainly get a sense of that love story between a mother and a daughter in the book. But as I said in my email to you, I think it's interwoven very nicely with the science underpinning this whole ketogenic approach. And I suppose my next question then would be, could we get into the weeds on the ketogenic approach, just a biology 101, as far as the different forms of fuel sources are concerned? Because we normally use glucose as a fuel source, but in the ketogenic approach, that's flipped on its head. You're using a different source of fuel. So if we could just put it into context for people, if they're not familiar with this ketogenic approach and with ketosis and ketones.
You bet. Yeah, that framework for how energized is your body, how much extra fuel do you have to live your life today. I like to parallel it to a campfire. And if you are trying to build a campfire where you're going to stay warm all night, anybody who's done this knows that the goal is to get those logs at the bottom nice and hot and that really beautiful red fire. Because then, even if you fall asleep, the heat's gonna hold you through the night. That when you look at our bodies, there's a very similar parallel. That if a campfire filled with leaves or pine needles and you put a spark of fire to it, it's very pretty. It lights up and it goes into the air, and there's even some smoke, and it's kind of fun to look at. But it's quick. It's over. And I parallel that to a cell that's being fueled by sugar, by glucose, by carbohydrates. And when that's the only fuel your body gets to use, it's also very dirty. That fuel just keeps putting out that extra smoke and sparkles. And even though that was kind of a fun ride the first time you did it, now if the only thing you're putting on that fire is those leaves, it's hard to breathe. It's not fun. The excitement's over, and it really is not a sustainable place to keep everybody warm for the night. We're going to skip over protein right now. Let's do protein for a second. Protein is something people think they use as fuel, but it really isn't a fuel source. It is a repair source. When you put proteins into our body, we have to break them down into amino acids or near amino acids, and then we can use them to build parts of our body for repair. But to use them as energy for fuel is a really bad way to do life. In essence, you taking sticks, and I don't mean like hardy sticks. I mean kind of the sticks that come right after the leaves on that tree. If you put those together, that's about how often you would have to fuel your body with protein as a way to keep energy flowing. And this has been really important for people when I have, left the basics of a ketogenic diet and really gotten into people where they want to say, well, I like the high protein. And what they're really saying is the marketers for protein have done a better job of convincing me that that's healthy. And the science isn't what convinced them of that. It was the marketers that did that. Because the science is, if you want the best fuel source for a cell, you want a fat source to be the regular use of energy inside that cell. So a fat can be burned in the form of a triglyceride, a form of a fatty acid, or it can be broken down into a ketone. Either one of those is what what the fuel line looks like when you're building that body's energy from fat. And it is the parallel to that log, that big log that the first one is kind of hard to get going. And we've all been there where you can't quite get it going on a fire and you just sit there cold and you get frustrated because once that log gets going, it's easy. And we've all been to the easy side. We've seen people with, oh, look at the fire. They just put another log on the fire. It's so easy. But when you're the one making that first log burn, you can get frustrated with how it is to do that if somebody doesn't teach you how to get the first log going. And I really think that's the key to the ketogenic diet is if you're somebody who's been traveling around the sun a few times. I'm 52 years around the sun, and that life, even though I come from rural South Dakota where hog farming and we had a butcher for our food, I was raised on processed food. And so your cells are so used to the high insulin production that they have a memory in your body that says, when you put that corn flour, oh, that's healthier than the white flour. I don't know. It's processed. And although a couple times a year, that might not be a bad idea, you're doing it every day because you live in a modern world where the access to that processed stuff makes life fast, easy, and you can rinse, repeat, and our taste buds really like it. So now your body is stuck on that. And when I showed up to the ketogenic diet, the reason I couldn't be ketones for so long is I was insulin resistant. I had a nice tummy full of fat. I had visceral organs that were surrounded by fat, and they were trained to do that because of the way I had eaten for years. So to get that first set of ketones, to get that first log to burn, I messed it up like every way possible. And every time I thought, oh, my blood sugar must be getting low, I'll just add a little bit. What I was really doing was delaying the moment that it was going to take for me to finally get on the side that the fat cells in my body would open up and you could start to circulate triglycerides and get fatty acids to burn in your cells, which is that first log of energy. But I will tell you, after that 26-mile ruck, I could feel it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I should be tired. I am not tired. I feel great. And having read about it saying, this is what's supposed to happen. Why the hell isn't this happening? What's wrong with me? And what was wrong with me is, well, I'd birthed 3 children. That is a state of insulin resistance by definition. That's how you keep the baby in. That's how you grow the baby. So women, welcome to the other side. The insulin resistance is so easy after having a child. And then to get your cells to go backwards without compromising your bone health, without losing a bunch of muscle mass, somebody needs to sneak you the cliff notes, which is you need to fuel your cells on fat. Not only does it help that brain to repair, it is a sustainable energy where your focus in life is no longer on what am I going to eat next? What's the kind of food I'm going to have tomorrow? That obsession with food that you have to have if you're in a glucose-fed menu. Well, your fuel's only lasting a couple hours, so you have to stay in the cycle of constantly thinking about when you're eating this meal, where's the next one going to come from? And when you are fed on fat, when you finally have the logs burning in your mitochondria, I fast for 60 hours every week. And to say it's easy isn't nothing, but it's nothing compared to what I was fighting with when I was constantly thinking about how the heck am I going to keep up with a practice and raising kids and marriage and all this stuff and eat every 2 to 3 hours. Either I was going to be crabby or something had to give. It just wasn't possible to do all that with a fuel source that was on and off, on and off, on and off.
Well, you've mentioned the reduction of inflammation already. Can we talk more about this and also the increase in human growth hormone production whenever you ascribe to this low carb or a ketogenic diet? And perhaps we can include some of the other physiological benefits that come with being on this diet.
So if I had to rank, what do I think the benefits are? Okay, everybody loves the weight loss that comes when they first go into a state of ketosis. In fact, I tell patients, our brand, who is the Dr. Boz brand now, is if you're on the first time of the ketogenic diet, go for it. But that moment where you see everybody else doing success and you hear these sensational stories of reversing a cancer, reversing an autoimmune disorder, having chronic migraines that went away, that tinnitus, that ringing in your ears that's been there for 10 years, gone. If you're looking for the reversal of medical problems, you're going to need a medical grade ketogenic diet. You're going to need some instruction, not necessarily one-on-one from me, but here's the rules on how to get that. Because what I write about in the book, I mean, I mentioned weight loss a little bit, but it is all about what was happening inside those cells that were producing cancer. And why was my mom's muscle tone at 71 better 9 months into that story than it had been in 20 years? And it has everything to do with the question you asked. Number one, you cannot reverse that inflammation at a cellular level when the amount of insulin you're producing is excessive. It's just the opposite. It is going to coat the grime that will live around each cell. And you have millions of cells, right? So now you add up all of that grime, and that equates to things like, why does an autoimmune disorder begin in the first place? Well, it is a cellular inflammatory mismatch going on in your bone marrow, in your lymph nodes, in your thyroid, in your gut. Wherever your immune system is attacking the wrong place, you've got the white blood cells that are inflamed, and you have the tissue that's inflamed, and the white blood cells decide they're attack that part of the body. So the word inflammation has been marketed as, oh, this is anti-inflammatory. So when I go to answer questions like this, I really want your mind to be in a place. This is a cellular problem. It is a really tiny microscopic problem times a billion in your body. So to get it to go away, it isn't that you peak ketones for a couple of days and it's gone. You've been bathing these cells. You've been creating that grime for 20 years. Welcome to an internal medicine clinic. Welcome to the chronic disease management that I have seen line the walls of my clinic for the 25 years I've been doing this. To get that to go away, that cellular process needs to be the cleanest fuel possible. So go back to that campfire. They come up with the ketogenic diet. We teach them how to get that first log burning, and boom, they do great. They ride the wave of 2-3 weeks, whatever it is. But then the process of staying away from something that's very tempting, that's very rewarding, and now that you've been away from it a little while, you have a little bit of those carbs, and you get that party, you get that sparkling campfire again. And, taking care of broken brains for the first 15 years, a lane that many people don't think about is, yes, I took care of broken brains with migraines and post-chemotherapy and surgery and seizures and concussions, but I took care of a lot of addiction. And that behavioral component that says, how do I get somebody to not go back to the process, the sex, drugs, rock and roll, find something to abuse that they were doing that was injuring their brain. We get their brain better in one weekend of doing something they shouldn't do, and we reverse everything it took us 6 months to get them to do. So that behavioral component became really important in this journey of how do you coach people to get truly away from it. And that's the level of removal of inflammation that shows up at about that 4th, 5th, 6th week. The same moment where they're saying, oh, I read about this thing that I can do dirty keto and be just fine. Oh, I am fine. I will have a little bit of net carbs. I'm not going to do total carbs. And of course, what they don't realize is your cells have a memory. You spent those 20 years with that extra 25 pounds, your pancreatic cells are going to make too much insulin, and you're going to be right back at a flat line for weight loss, but more importantly, a flat line for the removal of the inflammation. And that cellular grime needs to be removed. And I really think Grandma Rose's, that's the affectionate name we call my mother, Grandma Rose's journey made all the right mistakes where she did great, so did I. And then we kind of said, yeah, we can loosen up a little, right?
And this is where in the book your mother gets good lab results and you decide to celebrate by having one single beer. But unfortunately, that throws your new regime, your new diet out the window.
All it took was one. And you're like, and honestly, I was like, you don't realize how that feels until like what grime or swelling or chronic inflammation feels like, because it's that little frog in the water and the temperature of the water gets higher and higher and you don't notice that it's boiling around you. And so then you get into ketosis and you feel the removal of inflammation and you feel great. And then you have one beer. And you're like, I feel really heavy. I don't feel good again. And so the straight comparison of what your body feels like when you add back all that grime. And I think it's very similar to what happens when people say, I used to have this problem with alcohol. I went to AA for 5 months, and now I'm okay to have a beer here and there. And I'm like, your brain isn't ready for that. You have to rewire the brain in a way that isn't going to be dependent on that crutch over time. And I really think that the addictive component to having processed foods in our life, especially those high in carbohydrates, it's this truth serum. Like you want to feel good, you've got to keep the blood glucose low. You've got to keep ketones in your bloodstream, not just mythical. You can measure these, you can test yourself. And I really think, one of the, I didn't ask for this path. I was going to take care of broken brains for a living and do the thing I was doing, right? And I end up with a book and a YouTube channel that it's a gift from God. It really is. So here I have all these patients who want me to teach them how to do a ketogenic diet. And I'm like, well, you don't need me. You just need to do it. And you need a friend. You need a buddy. And this is not hard. You don't need a medical degree to teach you how to do a ketogenic diet. And I tried to not do it for a long time. And in fact, there's a tipping point. When I wrote the second book, I have a little bitty clinic in the prairies of South Dakota, and I have people trying to fly in from all over the country to be my patient. And my staff is ready to have a coup. Like, they're like, if you add one more patient to this practice, I don't care if they're from the North Pole. We are maxed. We cannot take care of one more. So there's this season of life where you think your kids are fine without parents called middle school. And she had this wonderful mentor who said, if I can give you one bit of advice, I'm holding my brand new baby, first days of being a mother. When they're in middle school, pick them up from school. Best advice ever. I mean, pick them up from school, go back to the clinic, do whatever you need to do, change your hours, find a way to pick up your kids from school when they're in middle school. And so I'm sitting in middle school. It's middle school line car pickup. It's South Dakota. The windows are frozen. It's like normal, 10 degrees, maybe 10 below, whatever. And this woman takes my book and she smashes it into my windshield and then she looks behind the book and said, "Did you write this book?" And I'm like, and so it's freezing out. I said, well, I can't roll down the window. I'm like, get in. Yeah. She sits in the seat next to me, and she's this larger than life Brazilian woman with this really thick accent, and she's talking super fast and super loud, saying, "I just got out of hospital." And she's shaking the book at me. "Do you know what they fed me? I had colon cancer. They removed it. They fed me pudding." I'm like, I'm sorry? So I don't know her. I really did not know her. I mean, maybe we'd been in a mom's club somewhere, but I couldn't think of her. And she goes, I've called your office to be your patient. I need to be your patient. They won't let me in. And I'm thinking, shit, I really am not going to let you in now. And I said, well, who are your doctors? And she lists off her doctor. I'm like, they're good people. All you need to do is say you're on a ketogenic. Just tell them I did. They know nothing. I'm like, give them the book. I mean, I would try any way to get out of this. And she said something, and it's again one of those moments where God's using another person's vocal cords to talk to you. And she says, "You need to lead a class, and I'll be your first student." And I thought, oh, that's truth. And then I said, all right, show up at 8 o'clock on a Friday morning. There's an empty, unrented office space in my building, I'll have some folding chairs, bring a couple friends. And personally, I was doing this because I would try to see these patients to teach them the ketogenic diet. I was so sick and tired of telling people what a ketone was. I was going to just get out and forget it. I don't want to do this again. I don't want to tell one more person about a ketone, right? And what was the sad part is I couldn't get paid for it. If I didn't talk about starting a prescription, stopping a prescription, or managing their medical problems, I couldn't get reimbursed from it. Like, it was too on the fringe. What did you do? And so either you got to get the patient to say, hey, are you taking your meds? And you have to at least have part of your conversation be about the medication and play the campy game that's how your insurance is going to bill me. Or you say, this is ridiculous. I don't like living this farce. Let's just go do a class for free. And so Friday mornings became this place where I would do a class for free. And the first day, everybody could see the breath coming out of their mouth because it was freezing. But that began saying, hey, this is a support group. And this is actually how I got my addicts off of their booze, whatever they're addicted to. And really, yes, there's some science in this, but it's the journey of how do you forgive yourself for screwing it up and get back on the wagon, because it is area under the curve where you have ketones in circulation. If you want that inflammation to go away, if I wanted my mom's cancer to really stay suppressed, gone, the word cure makes everybody nervous, but for all practical purposes, it was an autoimmune process that was causing it. And as long as her inflammation stayed low, she was golden. She looked great. In her journey, she did need chemotherapy again, but she got chemotherapy while in a ketogenic state, in the healthiest version of her body. She was down like 50 pounds back to her wedding weight. And my God, my chemotherapy worked. My friend's chemotherapy worked amazing. She didn't get the brain injury. She needed a fraction of the dose, and she got wildly successful outcome. And so you say, well, look at that. There is this place where when you can teach people to live in this zone of low inflammation, of constantly delivering ketones to their circulation, and then not skip that. The hardest part is the long game. That your ability to stay on the path has a lot to do with who did you bring along with you? Who's your accountability partner? Are you pricking your finger, or are you lying to yourself that I'm keto? That's air quotes for people on a podcast.
And would you go so far as to say that this ketogenic diet, this unconventional, this contrarian approach as far as conventional treatment protocols are concerned, would you say that it kept your mother alive for longer, and that her quality of life for as long as she was alive was better than it would have been without this approach?
So again, I had managed her healthcare for 10 years, and I'm good at what I do. She had the best Western medicine could offer. Every test, everything. There was nothing we could have done better. And by the time that story is 9 months into that, where that book started, she's got the 50 pounds off, whatever it was, 40 something pounds off that she'd been trying to get off for years. She had gone from this dopey grandma who was always needing a nap in the afternoon to the mother I remember as a child, this energized Mary Poppins kind of magical woman who was being weighed down by every tiny little cell in her body was inflamed. And we didn't get that to go away in 6 weeks. It took time, an area under you had to keep them in a ketogenic state in order to get that. When I have patients write in and saying, how long is it going to take for me to get that ringing in my ears? I heard you talk about that. It's the strangest thing that gets the emails is tinnitus, ringing in the ears. That is an inflammation of the tiny little bones in your ear. Almost always, that's what it is. And people say, how long do I have to be keto to get that to go away? I'm like, long enough that the cells in your ear no longer have inflammation. And they aren't the first ones for your body to shoot cleanup on. So you've got to stay the course. It isn't something where you're looking at the timer saying, hey, you said, I'm like, no, your commitment to staying honestly in the state of ketosis, or at least pushing that body that you can measure ketones in circulation several times a week. You have to do that if you want these. I mean, they're fantastical claims out there. I have one chapter in the book called snake oil, because it's what it sounds like. It heals this, it heals this, it heals this. Like, there's nothing that heals that many things, people. That's got to be fake. And if I wasn't the one standing on the other side of the patient going, never seen that before. I mean, so many of those, the first 10 years of taking care of patients with a ketogenic diet, I'm like, I didn't know you could stop vitiligo. I thought once that started, it was gonna progress forever. That's where people lose melanin in their skin and they start to get white spots. It's an autoimmune problem. I didn't know that. I mean, one of the most heartbreaking for me personally, one of the things that keeps me in this space, even when I say I never want to explain a ketone again, it's not really true. Crohn's disease, actually ulcerative colitis, is one of the saddest stories. And I was a third-year medical student. I was assigned to follow this guy for a year who had ulcerative colitis. And so every time he had an appointment in my town, I would go to that appointment, whether it was in the hospital, the ER, the clinic. My job was to shadow his case for a year. And he was a typical 22-year-old wild man having fun with his life, except he had this terrible diagnosis of ulcerative colitis, where his immune system was had his anus and just eating the tissue all the way up. And everybody said, you just need to cut it out. You just need to cut it out because that'll be better. You just need to cut it out and then it'll be gone. And he held off. And during a time where his colon was so swollen, he couldn't pass stool, the surgeons won, and they cut out his colon. And the patient was so demoralized by being this young, healthy, athletic person eating a bunch of carbs that he killed himself. And that funeral is a place in my heart that I'm like, they didn't even offer it. Would it have fixed it 100%? I don't know. But for heaven's sake, someone offer it before you cut out something you can't undo. And now I have every one of the ones that writes in about my Crohn's is reversed. It is gone. I put that in that little file saying, look, these are the cases where it's gone. Yeah. I think one of my most proud moments over the last 2 years was an article, and you can Google this, reversal of dementia. And that sounds fantastical. It sounds like it can be true. I would have not thought that's possible. But this patient had Down syndrome. So Down syndrome is like you're aging the patient faster. They get insulin resistance much sooner. And then it's like what takes us 70 years takes them 30. So she's full on dementia by 42. And the years before that, she was on a low carb diet where she lost 100 pounds with her mom because they said if you lose the weight, her brain will be better. So mom goes on to a ketogenic diet while her daughter was on low carb. She said, I just didn't want to be that restrictive to my daughter. And she's coming to this support group here in Florida. When I transferred from Fridays, we moved it to Tuesdays. And now the support group still happens. And she's like, I just needed to ask a bunch of questions and nobody would answer them. So I drive 2 hours to ask these questions. And about the third week, she says, do you think I can do this with my dementia diagnosis Down syndrome daughter? And I said, if you do it, you must document the numbers. She has to be in ketosis. Do not play around with this. And that mother followed everything I said to do. And she said within 2 weeks, she was out of diapers. She now could control her bowel and bladder. She had this problem that showed up that she couldn't navigate. Like she would walk up to the table and she would try to walk through the table because she couldn't compute that she needed to walk around the table to get to where she needed to go. Again, a new problem of just being able to navigate. And she's like, that problem went away. And then it was, her anxiety is better. I stopped having to give her these medications for whenever she freaks out. She stopped eating out of the garbage. All these like dementia related issues that are so discordant with life were reversed within 6 weeks of a ketogenic diet. That's like a crime. And what this family had been through to try and put the barriers up for this, this adult Down syndrome woman, and then the freedom they had. I mean, you want to see somebody singing praises. It is, you gave us our life back. And sure, they're all on the ketogenic diet because it makes it easier for that girl. But the mom's life is better. Her autoimmune problems went away. She got down into her ideal weight. The dad's doing better. The sister's doing better. And the patient with Down syndrome was the angel. She had severe anxiety during all this too, right? Because this paranoia, couldn't do anything. And she got so much better that she got to reclaim her role as the angel for the pageant at the Christmas show. That's a status symbol.
Well, that's another example of transformation because of this ketogenic approach. I know you're on this particular diet yourself. What exactly does a normal day of eating look like for you then, if you're cutting out all the carbs? Because people say, no carbs, what are you eating then? Because you're not relying an awful lot on protein, as you said earlier on in our conversation. So what exactly are you eating?
Yeah, so I do think when I share this, it can be off-putting to people. So, because I've been doing it since 2015 and it's boring. So I have a few things I really like. It's very carnivore-ish because that's easiest for me and my palate. I really like that. But usually my morning is filled with a cup of black coffee. There might be a splash of heavy cream in there every once in a while. But there's usually salt in my coffee. I think that's the one thing that people don't appreciate is when you don't have that inflammation holding on to those electrolytes, you do need to cycle them through your system. So high salt when you've got high sugar, not such a good idea. When you have high ketones, you need the salt to keep the body functioning, or they'll have such profound fatigue that they'll say, this diet doesn't work for me. I like convenience. So if I am going to have breakfast, it's usually egg bites with bacon in them. And so those are easy to eat on the fly. And it's apparently how I live my life is on the fly. And then I often don't eat until I was home with family. Like I would go throughout the day. I don't have lunch. I don't have any food around the office except, sardines. If you're really hungry, they can have sardines. And you can call me a bad boss, or you can say, no, eating shouldn't be this big of a focus in our office. This is what we do for a living. And at the end of the day, I usually will have either a hamburger with a pat of butter on the top, maybe some mayonnaise that's, the good kind of mayonnaise. I like steak, but it's got to be a marbled steak. One of my favorite things that if it's my birthday and my kids want to do something nice for me, you take pork belly and you cut it into smaller pieces and you put it under the broiler and it gets like crunchy brown. It's like popcorn, but it's high fat, high protein. And so I love that, but it just takes a lot of time to make that. So there are some things that I do put, if I'm going to have a vegetable, it's usually carrying a lot of fat. So it's usually creamed spinach with butter or an artichoke, Parmesan, jalapeno butter mess, like an appetizer that's a dip, but I use a fork. I have had enough time in this space too to have times where if I don't stay the course very well, my gut doesn't like that. It likes to stay in a very stable rhythm. I don't have any side effects or symptoms when I do that. But I live in the real world and I'm not perfect. And so when I get off the path a little bit, one of my favorite things that has really become more of a staple is there's something called, they're algae bits, but it has a bunch of polyphenols in it. And when you're looking at some of the hormones your gut needs, the structure to make. So algae is something strange that I don't try to make things just out of strange foods, but the good thing about the algae bits is I can buy them and they don't go bad in the fridge. They're just there. So vegetables tend to go bad in my house because you either need to eat them in the first few days and then we just don't eat them that much. So when people say, what do you do for fiber? I'm like, the human gut will adjust. When you come into this space and you're very diseased on the inside, beware, it doesn't hurt you to not have fiber in the long run, but your gut has to be healthy enough to deal with that. And so one of my favorite ways to journey people through that transition, and even I'll have probably 3 doses of this a week, is on my website, bozmd.com. There's a Dr. Boz favorites, which are the products that I tend to add to the ketogenic diet. And there's those algae bits on that Dr. Boz favorites page. Because there's a bunch of them that are fake news and they don't really do as much. They still charge you a bunch. So if you're going to buy them, buy the ones that do what they say they're going to do. And I found that is something that, it's not vegetables that I eat, but that's probably the most vegetable thing I put on my menu regularly.
I suppose the question people are probably thinking is, and I'm thinking it myself, do you enjoy food? What's your relationship like with food? Because it could be, in this instance, it could be quite adversarial in that you're constantly thinking, oh no, I can't have that, I can't have that, I can have that and I can have that. But so do you enjoy eating? Do you enjoy your food?
This is a great question. So again, my whole passion has been getting peak brain performance. So when you're peripubertal, so you can all think back to the time right before puberty and right after, there are things that happen in your life that will wire who you become. And if during that season of brain growth, you have a trauma or you have something very sensational happen, it's wired into who you are. That's super important for brain health. In our culture, many times, that's the time where people are learning to eat on their own. They're taking their own lunch, they're choosing their own food. And if where dopamine is made in their brain comes from only food, if their pleasure is only from food, they spend a lifetime chasing, how do I feel pleasure from that food again? In fact, that's probably the core to any addiction recovery program is, I need to show you that you don't just get dopamine from getting drunk or high. You can feel pleasure from these other places in life, like relationships, like acts of service, like telling stories or creating things. And I know that sounds very touchy-feely, but our brain is not designed to get dopamine from one source. I love food. And when I eat, I do enjoy it. I love steak. It tastes very good. It's very much about my family of origin. That's home cooking for me. I could just as easily have said, I'm going to like the cinnamon pull-aparts that my mother used to make every Saturday morning. It was a choice for me to say, that was a season of childhood. I'm choosing this season that other memory is what I'm going to enrich. I'm going to remember better. I'm going to be very mindful when I eat it. And the pleasure is real, but it is also intentional and practiced. And I find that to be a space where people say, oh, my daughter has anorexia, or I'm trying to help somebody and they have a food problem. And that it is real, absolutely. But give them the best hormones for their brain to not be in that crave cycle that the only place they feel pleasure is food. So yes, I enjoy food. I still love ice cream. I don't know if I'll ever get rid of that one. But I also don't love it more than, time with my husband or doing something adventurous that we really like in our identity. But it doesn't happen by accident. You actually have to try to put that back into your life. And to me, those are the examples that I try to say, sure, I could eat sardines for the rest of my life and I would have very low pleasure from my food. But I put the things in my menu that do give me pleasure. And then I know that shouldn't be the sole source. In fact, it should be only about 1/10 of our pleasure should be coming from food. You should have other sources that you get pleasure from.
I could talk to you for another hour. It's fascinating listening to your story. I love your contrarian approach. As you know, I've spoken to other contrarians like Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and I just love that being on the edge of convention that you mentioned earlier on in our conversation. If people want to seek out more about you and your approach, I know you have a website, you have a massive presence on YouTube with almost 700,000 followers. Your book, which I read, was Any Way You Can. You have another book called Keto Continuum. Can you tell people how people can find out more about you online and where they can go?
Sure. And I'll actually pitch to the one thing that I used to be a clinic filled with brains. And the one thing that I do now for the service of people is I've left the world of prescription or of insurance and Medicare, Medicaid in America. And I am in a cash for services process that I do twice a year. It's actually how I fund the YouTube channel, is that I do 2 classes a year and I take you through an intense metabolic kick. It's the best idea I've ever had in medicine. It's probably the best medicine I've ever done, where for 3 weeks, you are on the same protocol I would put you if you came to me and says, Doc, I have seizures and I need this ketogenic diet to make my brain better. Or Doc, I have cancer and I need this ketogenic diet to but what I'm showing you is a medical grade example of what a ketogenic diet looks like. And it's 3 weeks of commitment in the fall and 3 weeks of commitment that I do in like late January, early February. So we offer the class twice a year. It's the foundation of the business that I do now, which is teach the ketogenic diet at the highest level. And you only have to take the class once, but I've had people say, every time I take it, I get better at what I'm trying to accomplish. And this will be our 5th class that we're going to offer this fall. And I have people saying, I started out with 36 medications. I'm down to 1. And whether we get that one off, I don't know, but they're healthier than they've ever been. And that's the kind of medicine that I hope to do until I die. Is twice a year offer this class. You can find out all about that at bozmd.com. That's our website. That's the best landing form. And we've been hacked a couple of times. So I send people to the website and say, please subscribe to the email list. It's the only thing they can't steal from us. And you'll get announcements about when we do these things through our email.
Dr. Boz, as I said, it's an absolute pleasure. I wish you every success with your ventures and spreading your message. But for the moment, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, that's great. You have a great podcast and what you're doing. You took the biochemistry and you added some great Irish accent and some fun conversation. So your success is well deserved. Congratulations.
Well, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Happy Habit podcast. If you enjoyed it, if you got any value whatsoever, show your support. It's absolutely free and it'll take you no time at all. You can like, subscribe, share with other like-minded people who get value from subjects that we cover on these episodes. You can also leave us a positive rating on iTunes or on Spotify. And if you're on YouTube, so many people have become subscribers over there in recent weeks. Join them. You can also leave a comment beneath any of the videos and click that bell notification for any future videos which come every Monday and Thursday. Until next time, stay happy.